Brad Watson's new collection of stories, Aliens in the Prime of Their Lives, is wonderfully varied. Watson experiments with pushing the boundaries of autobiographical fiction, science fiction, traditional Southern Gothic fiction, and of course, there are plenty of dogs. I spoke with Brad Watson at the Alabama Booksmith in Homewood, Alabama. Brad, it's a pleasure to see you again.
It's always great to see you, Don.
I don't think we've had a chance to talk face to face in a couple of years.
2 years.
And you're on tour with this new book, your third. You have a volume of stories, Last Days of the Dog Man, a novel, The Heaven of Mercury, and now Aliens in Their Prime. And it is brand new, just out. People are just reviewing it and reading it. And we're here to talk about you and your work.
Okay.
But just a few days ago, your teacher, a man who meant a lot to you, Barry Hannah, passed away. And all over the world of Southern letters, people are talking about Barry. And people who were taught by Barry are especially talking about Barry. People who knew him, people who were influenced by him.
Yeah.
And I know that you were his student, and I knew Barry pretty well too, and I never figured out what the magic was that he had that he could give to you and to Bob Inman and a dozen others. What was it?
Well, you knew you could never really, no one ever really knew how Barry wrote the way he did. And as you said, I think you put it, I forget exactly how you put it, but it was you remember the sentence?
What I said?
Yeah, I saw you quoted in the Tuscaloosa News, the same article I was in.
I thought he was a romantic in touch with his unconscious mind.
You said he was more in touch with his unconscious, you thought, than most writers were, and I thought that was right on target. I agreed it. And it's also interesting that Barry, to the end, although he quit drinking, said, "It's too bad that I couldn't stop at 2 drinks, because it seemed as if I got right there at the right spot after a couple of drinks,
Uh-huh.
Just sort of pulled himself out of reality a little bit, out of the everyday life, everydayness, into his own mind.
In class, he was a teacher of fiction writing. You were a student of fiction writing. Now you're the teacher of fiction writing. What did he do that was useful to you, and did you get any of it so that you can be useful to somebody else in turn?
What Barry would do in the classroom was go straight to whatever wasn't working and tell you exactly what it was and why it wasn't working. And he wouldn't fool around with all the fiddly stuff. He didn't write long critiques, as most people do now. He didn't, which usually involves a lot of massaging of the ego before you get around to saying, this is the problem, and fix it. Barry just said, Brad, the story doesn't have an ending. You've got to have an ending. It must be full of power and light. Barry, and that would be it. And as the story I really love to tell is once I came in with a story, and I knew it wasn't any good, but I brought it in, and Barry comes in and he says, let's start with Watson's story today. He said, Brad, I have to tell you that the story's really just not any good. It's just not. And furthermore, this week I've been riding around with some cops in town doing a little research. So I let the cops read it. And they said they didn't think it was any good either. So let's just go on to the next story, and you just go home and write a better one.
Very, very helpful.
It actually was. No one does that anymore, but I actually think that, there are a lot of stories you write when you're learning to write that you ought to just say, that didn't work, I'll try another one.
And when you're teaching your fiction writing students, do you channel a little of this?
I really, no, they seem to be more delicate than we were in those days.
We were made of better stuff.
Well, the workshop allowed, a sort of rougher culture, people expected to be, their teachers to be blunt, to sometimes be blunt to the point of, yes, people would cry. Yeah, nowadays, most responsible teachers of creative writing in a workshop will really try to figure out where that student is in terms of his or her writing,
Yeah.
his or her ability, and try to put yourself there with them. You know, it helps to remember when you really didn't know exactly what you were doing.
Well, we've known each other a long time, and I have observed you live in the Southeast. You lived in New England. You had a spell in California. And now you found a place, Wyoming, where there are almost no people. This may be the place for you. You've been there a while now, and it's working for you.
5 years it's working for me. I can't say that there wasn't something of a misanthropic element in my decision to go out there. Yes, I feel a little bit crowded.
Well, there are only 500,000 people in the whole state, right?
Yes, same number of square miles too, basically.
You get one each out there, do you?
If they could spread them out like that, it'd be even better. But they do have urban centers, unfortunately.
Well, it's been whatever misanthropy may be at work. It's been good, and you've been working out there. You've been producing, and this new book has some interesting stuff in it. One of the things, though, that has to be said to a person who wrote The Last Days of the Dogmen is that this book too is full of dogs. Why is that?
I didn't even realize that it's full of dogs. But yes, there is a water dog god, which is very dog type story. I decided to put a dog in terrible argument in a way I've never used a dog before,
Dog
and to
point of
take that
view.
risk, yeah, you know. And I can talk a little bit about what I think the boundaries are, you know, with doing that sort of thing. I don't think you should ever put a story in the voice of a dog. I love Paul Auster's work, but I didn't really like Timbuktu because it was narrated by the dog. But I do like William Maxwell's book, So Long, See You Tomorrow, where he has a dog. He goes into the dog's mind for a while, worrying about the boy coming back or not, and apparently he had to fight his editors to keep that in the book. But it's one of the best parts of the book because the dog kind of becomes Maxwell's consciousness.
Well, that story, terrible arguments. It's a
Terrible argument. Yeah.
Man and a woman, and they
Yeah.
quarrel and they fight, and it's just painful and funny. And the dog says, "What is it the dog thinks?" He said, or she.
Yeah.
I should move on, but it's not that bad here.
It could be worse.
It could be worse.
It
elsewhere.
might actually become worse somewhere else, so I think I'll stay. I'll take my chances, yeah. But she's very worried, you know, and thinks she did something wrong. I think dogs can actually feel that way,
Oh, I think so too.
you know.
I give dogs a lot of credit for feelings, if
Yeah.
not logical thought.
Dogs are always affected, I think, but when people act up and act badly.
Dogs and children. Let's jump to vacuuming.
Vacuum.
Vacuum, in which there are 3 children
Right.
and parents who quarrel.
Yes.
They have a ongoing, endless argument. You suggested that came out of almost like a single flash of memory, a single image from your own childhood.
It did, and a very important one for me. I remembered one night, all 3 of us, my brothers and I, sitting on the sofa, trying to watch television while my mother was trying to vacuum and cook supper at the same time, and us worthless boys were doing nothing but sitting there watching the television, and she blew up. You know, she just got really mad about it, and I felt terrible about it. You know, and that image has never left me. And one day, I decided I would just write that paragraph and see what happened. And the story, I mean, beyond that, truly is there's almost no autobiographical stuff in that story beyond that paragraph,
Right.
except for location, except for setting.
I've read some responses to that story, and they find the ending bizarre, and I don't. I thought it made perfect sense that given the shock of the events in the story, the jumping from the roof, the crazy next door doctor,
Yeah, the BB fight.
The BB gun. Given
Assault.
the fact that the boys at the end, and this is not a mystery, we're not giving anything away, but the boys at the end seem transformed. They actually pitch in. They're cooking supper and arranging things and doing what they should have been doing.
Right. Yeah. I think that the story is about the beginning of a sense of fear of losing their mother,
Yes.
and then taking on responsibility, and of course creating chaos in the course of that. But
Right.
I think growing up a little bit.
That story has what we would conventionally think of as an ending. People learn something, behavior alters, there's a shift. It's in many ways a conventional story, but you're not a great advocate for the well-made story or the conventionally finished story. You like your endings loose, vague, ambiguous. What are you doing there?
Strange, to evoke the strangeness that's been built or infused before the ending arrives. Oddly enough, what I think the writer I think who wrote the best essay on plot I've ever read is John Barth, one of the most experimental writers in this country, and he calls it incremental perturbations, or how to know whether you've got a plot or not, and he uses a lot of scientific terminology just for fun. But basically what he says that in any story, it doesn't matter if you're taking a detective novel or Virginia Woolf, he says all stories he believes that are successful start out where things are in balance, but precariously in balance, and then they become imbalanced, and through a series or incremental perturbations, things that make it slightly more unbalanced, and then finally it falls apart. And as in Shakespeare, after things fall apart, then they can rest, and the story can come to a rest, and people can feel at rest, and that's an ending.
All right. You don't feel any need for the things that have fallen apart to be put back together.
No.
The state of rest is them having fallen apart.
Because I don't think that's true. I don't think things do get put back together. I mean, maybe at the end of their lives, sent down the road.
Right. You spoke of the autobiographical nugget in Vacuum.
Yeah.
In Visitation, and I've given Visitation a considerable amount of thought, because for that story, I'm a peculiar reader. That is, as I read through Visitation, I was thinking, oh, I remember that, or I remember when those things were happening, or
Whoops.
Well, no. The real point is, though, that 999 people out of 1,000, I mean, even your article in the Oxford American on visiting the psychics along the roadside played into Visitation. That gypsy was clearly brought out of your adventure with palm reading and so on.
Yeah, she could be a composite of several of those.
Yeah,
psychics.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's not my business to sift through the story and find out the parts that I believe to be autobiographical and the parts that I believe to be invented. That doesn't matter. I grant you that. But we're having an interesting national discussion about whether memoir should have anything invented in it. And then we had books like Look Homeward Angel, which I'm happy to compare with your work.
A fan's notes,
in which it seems that it's very, very autobiographical, and the invented things are almost intrusive. Now, where do you don't care about that? I mean, where do you stand, or you don't stand?
No, I really don't care. Someone said, not me, but just 2 days ago in Wyoming at our school, when some visiting writers were there, they said, James Fry didn't create the problem around that book. Oprah created the problem around that book, because these people who were speaking believe that they should not, in creative nonfiction, be forced to adhere to fact, and that they can, that they're allowed to conflate characters, times, events, make things up to shape the story they're trying to tell, and that the audience should be aware of that and be okay with that. And that way, what is David Shields' new book, Reality Hunger, where he put together a book out of quotes, entirely quotes from other books, and did not want to cite them, was forced by his publisher to cite them, and he took freedom with some of those quotes to shape them in a different way if he wanted to. This is sort of off the subject, but in terms of fiction, I mean, he doesn't really believe in fiction anymore, apparently, but as something made up. I think there's so much in the world that none of it's made up. I do. When I write a story that has an autobiographical impulse, spark, a seed, or even series of events, there has to be a degree of invention. There has to be a departure from what really happened, because usually what really happened doesn't have a great deal of what Barth calls dramaturgy. That is, it doesn't have a very good story shape, and you have to make a story out of it.
No.
And you start, and you actually realize that you can know more about a character that you invent than someone you think you know in real life, because you're giving something of yourself to that character, to any character you write. I think something, something of universal experience goes into that character.
Does the word memoir, which was the case with Fry, does that not carry a special problem, though, as opposed to creative nonfiction? If I hand you a document and I say, Brad, I've written my memoir.
Yeah.
Do you expect to find things in there that are not true?
Yes.
You will, of course. But
yes, and that's because I think memory is incredibly unreliable.
Do you expect to find things in there that I put in there knowing they weren't true?
Yes, I do.
Well, you're a wise man.
Because I think, no one, unless you are some sort of savant who has a reel, film reel in your head with sound of everything that happened in your life, and you can replay it. Come on, right. You can generally recreate conversations, certain ones, but
let's move from the created and the remembered and the true and the possibly true to the title story, Aliens in the Prime of Their Lives, which has in it an element of homage to Vonnegut and Slaughterhouse-Five, and may or may not have aliens, but definitely has what some people would call alternative history. Things might have gone one way or another. Mm-hmm. There's a pair of people there, young couple, young, hopeless, clearly doomed, but they don't have to be doomed. Things could have gone differently. Do you think of the couple, the visitors, the visitation as visitation again? Oh well. Yeah. Do you think of that couple who appear in the night as aliens, or you just don't care?
I do think of them as aliens. I do. I do. I wanted to do a little genre bending in there, in the playful way that Vonnegut does it.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have them taken to Tralfamadore, and put into a dome so that the Tralfamadorians could watch them mate and be delighted, But but I did want them to mess with these people's heads. The original idea, I had them actually sort of zapping them to a lab, by means of some sort of plasmic transportation. Yes, wherein they would live out their lives in a state of suspended animation or something like that, but in their minds live out their lives as they thought it was going to go the moment they were zapped away. That was sort of the original way I was going to treat it, and that was actually in a novel that I put into the drawer. Wasn't going really well, so I sort of borrowed that idea and adapted it to this story, where as far as I'm concerned, they are able to put these people into a kind of state of suspended animation, which looks like a coma, and during which time their imaginations take over, and they believe they're living out their. It's almost like a holographic reality, and time
His
is
is wonderfully conventional. That is,
yeah.
they're a struggling young couple. They shouldn't have gotten married.
They're teenagers.
Probably.
They're in high school.
Yeah, they're about to be seniors.
They're seniors. They marry between their junior and
Yeah,
senior years.
yeah. And his dream, and therefore the fulfillment, is it works.
Yeah.
They raise their child. They have a nice little house. He has a job. He becomes a master carpenter.
Yeah.
Hers?
She goes off with somebody on a yacht to a Greek island and lives amongst very strange creatures who are beautiful and not quite real, and lives a life which is entirely fantastical within a fantasy.
Yeah. So her dream was never to be a successful wife and mother with him.
Her dream was to, for what happened to them, never to have happened, and for something that's almost all out of the tabloid fantasies to have happened, you know, because she's still at that stage in her life, and he's not.
I read that story. I read it more than once, and I thought, these visitors don't have to be aliens at all. This could be literally a dream. It could be literally a work of the imagination in which one imagines the life you could have had if at all the millions of forks in the road that we come to, you just take the other one instead of the one you took. Well, I looked up, you and I have spoken over the years different times about what you are often regard as slow productivity.
Yes.
But now you have 3 books. So I looked up William Styron. William Styron wrote a book every 7 years. And William Styron did real well.
But he started at 25. My first one came out a little later.
He didn't live that long. You'll do fine. So we do have three done. And what are you working on now?
I started a novel that I hope will go well, which takes place during the desegregation of the Mississippi schools in 1970, when I was in junior high school. In the middle of the year, it was incredibly disruptive for all of us students and faculty and people in town, where the students were trying to live through this and get along and make it work. Grown-up politics were not exactly trying to make it work. They were fighting over too many things. And during that year, though, we had a teacher who decided to put on a biracial play against the wishes of all the people in the administration. And she did, and it worked. And it was probably the most harmonious thing that happened during that semester, that winter semester of 1970 at Northwest Junior High School. So I was recently contacted by the woman, this remarkable woman who made this happen, and said, "Are you the Brad Watson who played Bill Sykes in the Northwest Junior High School production of Oliver?" And I said, "Yes, I am, and I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I've been wanting to do something with that." So we want to do an article about it, because actually, not only was it a remarkable thing in terms of race relations in a difficult time, but it also changed a lot of people's lives just to be in that play. Me, for instance, I was headed down a pretty direct juvenile delinquent path, and it gave me something to do and to focus on, and that it was the same way for a lot of people. Now, the narrator of the novel I'm working on is not at all like me. He is a white kid, but he's a strange white kid. Not to say that I'm not strange, but he has other issues. So I think I finally found a narrator who can tell this story. And for a long time I didn't know how I would tell that story. I did not want to tell it from the point of view of an ordinary lower middle class white kid. It just didn't seem like it would be as interesting to me. So I'm hoping that this will barrel ahead. The voice, I like the voice of it very much. But you know, Don, I always have a lot of things in the hopper. This is the one I want to do now, and I think I can work quickly.
Well, we'll look forward, and I do sense that you're your rate of production gets steadily faster. That's something that I seem to think. Well, Meridian, 1970, and we'll see in the novel what it was that caused you to think you should go to Hollywood and be an actor. and when you finish it,
Yeah.
I'll read it, and I hope we get a chance to sit and talk about the new novel.
If not that one, something else, because you know there are 4 others in progress.
Of course there are. Well, we'll look for them all.
All right. Yeah.
And thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me again, and it's been a pleasure for me too.